In Tigran echoing halls of the National Arts Center, the air was thick with anticipation. It was the annual gala, a night where the city's most celebrated artists, critics, and patrons gathered. The room buzzed with polite chatter, the clinking of champagne glasses, and the distant, polite applause for performers. Amidst this sea of tuxedos and evening gowns, a young woman named Elara moved almost invisibly. She was there with her mother, a cleaner who had worked at the center for over 20 years. Her mother's pride in the gleaming floors and polished brass was as profound as any artist's pride in their work. Elara had grown up in the shadow of this building. While her mother scrubbed and polished, Elara would sneak into the empty concert halls. She didn't have a teacher or formal lessons. Her only guide was the lingering spirit of the music that echoed in the vast, silent spaces. She'd press a key on the grand pianos, a forbidden thrill, listening to the note hang in the air like a ghost. Over the years, these single notes became chords, and the chords became melodies, fragments of symphonies she'd overheard, and whispers of music from her own soul. Tonight, her mother was working the gala. Elara, now 18, was helping her, collecting empty glasses and feeling utterly out of place. She watched the stage from the wings, her heart aching with a familiar longing. The final scheduled performer, a world-renowned pianist, had just finished his encore to thunderous applause. As the crowd began to mingle again, a group of influential artists and critics gathered near the stage. They were laughing, their voices dripping with condescension, as they discussed the unrefined tastes of the general public. It was then that they noticed Elara. She had drifted towards the magnificent grand piano on stage, its polished ebony surface reflecting the chandeliers like a dark, still lake. She reached out a hesitant hand, her fingers tracing the smooth, cool keys. She couldn't resist. Just one chord. A ripple of snickering went through the nearby group. "Look at that," one critic sneered. "The cleaner's girl thinks she's a virtuoso." Another added, "Probably wants to see what a real instrument feels like. Let's see if she can play chopsticks." Their laughter was sharp and cruel. Elara's face flushed with shame. Her hand recoiled as if burned. She was about to scurry away, back into the shadows where she belonged. But then, she caught her mother's eye from across the hall. Her mother wasn't looking at the mocking crowd. She was looking at Elara with a gaze that was steady and full of love, a look that said, "You have a right to be here. Your music has a right to be heard." Something shifted inside Elara. The years of quiet longing, of secret melodies, surged within her. She turned back to the piano. Her shame was replaced by a quiet, fierce resolve. She sat down on the leather bench, the wood smooth beneath her. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and let her fingers fall onto the keys. The first notes that emerged were not a clumsy attempt at a simple tune. It was a cascade of sound, a complex and haunting melody that silenced the laughter in an instant. The music was a storm and a whisper, a torrent of emotion that she had held inside for so long. It spoke of lonely nights in empty halls, of dreams nurtured in secret, of the quiet dignity of her mother's hard work. It was a sound that was raw and pure and utterly breathtaking. The critic who had just mocked her stood frozen, his champagne glass halfway to his lips. The artists who had been laughing stared, their mouths agape. The chatter throughout the grand hall died down, one conversation after another, as people turned towards the stage. A hush fell over the entire room. All eyes were on the unknown girl at the piano, pouring her entire life into the keys. The world-renowned pianist who had just performed was on his way out. He stopped dead in his tracks, turning back. He listened, his head cocked, a look of utter disbelief on his face. He began to walk back towards the stage, not with the arrogance of a star, but with the reverence of a student. Other musicians followed, drawn by the magnetic pull of the music. They gathered around the piano, not as hooches, but as witnesses to something extraordinary. Elara played on, lost in her own world. Her melody soared through the hall, filling every corner with its passionate, untamed beauty. It was a music that no conservatory could teach, born from a life lived in the margins, listening and dreaming. When the final note faded into silence, the hall remained completely still for a beat, as if holding its collective breath. Then, the silence was shattered. It wasn't just applause, it was an eruption. The entire room rose to its feet, a standing ovation that thundered with genuine awe and emotion. The famous pianist was the first to reach her. He didn't say a word. He simply bowed his head in respect. The critic who had sneered now looked at her with a shame-faced reverence. "Who are you?" he managed to whisper, his voice trembling. Standing in the back of the hall, tears streaming down her face, was Alera's mother. She wasn't just watching her daughter. She was watching a dream, once thought impossible, unfold in a blaze of glory. In that moment, Lara wasn't the cleaner's daughter. She was an artist. And in the hallowed halls where she once felt invisible, her music had made everyone, from the harshest critic to the most celebrated master, stop and listen. That night, the most beautiful art wasn't in a frame or on a pedestal. It was in the heart of a girl who dared to share her hidden song with the world. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe for more content that celebrates the hidden talents all around us. Remember to hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. We'll see you in the next video. The door at the back of the hall closed quietly. The sound was so soft, no one even noticed it. But someone did notice the music. Near the entrance, a tall figure stood perfectly still. This person had walked into countless halls, just like this. One big ones, small ones, crowded and silent ones. They'd seen it all, and nothing really surprised them anymore. But now, something did. The notes drifting from the stage weren't loud or fast. They weren't even perfect, but they were real. On stage, the little girl continued to play. Her shoulders began to relax, and the trembling in her hands eased, just a little. Each key she pressed felt lighter than the one before. She wasn't thinking anymore. She was remembering. She remembered the sound of rain tapping on a broken roof, the sound of her mother's tired breathing in the quiet of the night, and the sound of a hope she never dared to speak out loud. Slowly, people who had left for the break began to drift back into the hall. One by one, they stopped in their tracks. It wasn't because someone told them to, or even out of simple curiosity. It was the music. It pulled them in, drawing them closer. The low whispers faded away. Phones were slowly lowered into pockets. The casual smiles on some faces melted, replaced by something quieter, more thoughtful. The girl never looked up. She was afraid that if she did, the spell would break and she would stop. So she stayed lost inside her music. At the back of the hall, her mother slowly set down the mop she was holding. Her own hands trembled as she watched. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't wipe them away. She was terrified that if she blinked, this beautiful, impossible moment would simply disappear. Near the front, a person crossed their arms, not in anger, but in deep focus. Another, without even realizing it, sank into an empty seat. The laughter that had filled the hall just moments ago was gone, replaced by a shared, silent reverence. The melody shifted, growing deeper, carrying a touch of sadness, before warming into something hopeful. The girl leaned forward slightly, her feet still dangling high above the floor. Her fingers pressed the keys with a newfound courage. This wasn't just practice. This wasn't pretending. This was her. A quiet cough echoed, and the person who made it held their breath afterward, as if the sound might shatter something fragile in the air. The tall figure at the back took a silent step forward, then another, their gaze fixed on the stage, listening intently. The girl reached a part of the song that always made her chest feel tight. She slowed down, letting each note land gently, as if it were afraid to fall. Her mother pressed a hand to her mouth, a flood of memories washing over her. She remembered the nights her daughter cried softly into her pillow, thinking no one could hear her. She remembered all the times she had to say, maybe later, when the girl asked about piano lessons. There was never enough money. There was only effort. Only love. Now, the music filled the vast space between them, saying everything they couldn't. The girl's hands moved with more trust, more certainty. She didn't rush or try to impress anyone. She was simply playing the way she always had inside her own head, honest, simple, and true. Someone in the audience wiped their eyes, quickly looking away. Another leaned forward, resting their elbows on their knees, completely captivated. The tall figure finally reached the middle aisle, standing there in the stillness. Still, no one spoke. The final part of the melody arrived, as soft as a whisper. It felt like a goodbye, but also like a thank you. The girl felt it ending, and her heart began to beat fast again. She pressed the final key. The sound lingered in the air, holding on longer than anyone expected. Then, it faded into silence. But this wasn't an empty silence. It was a silence full of feeling. For a moment, nobody moved. The girl froze, her hands dropping to her lap. She stared down at the keys, suddenly afraid. Did she do something wrong? A second pass, then two. And then someone stood up, then another. Applause began to fill the hall. It wasn't a thunderous roar at first, but it was real. It was strong. It grew and grew, washing over the stage like a warm wave. The girl finally looked up, her eyes wide with disbelief. People were standing. All of them. The tall figure near the aisle clapped slowly, their eyes never leaving the stage. The girl couldn't understand it. She searched the crowd for her mother's face. Their eyes met across the room. Her mother nodded, tears now falling freely down her cheeks. A beautiful smile breaking through years of exhaustion. The girl stood up slowly and stepped back from the piano, but the applause didn't stop. Someone near the front spoke softly, not to anyone in particular, but to the moment itself. Where did she come from? No answer came. The girl walked off the stage, her heart racing, her hands cold, but the whole felt different now. Warmer, kinder. The piano sat alone on the stage, quiet once more, but it no longer seemed lonely. Her mother wrapped her in a tight hug. For the first time, the girl didn't feel small in this grand place. Se Felchin. The tall figure finally turned and spoke to the person beside them, their voice low but firm. Find her. It wasn't a loud command, not an urgent one, but it was serious. The girl didn't hear this. She only felt her mother's steady heartbeat against her cheek. The lights in the hall dimmed slightly as people began to talk again, but their voices had changed. They were softer now, slower. The break was over, but something else had just begun. The girl looked back one last time at the stage, at the piano. It no longer felt untouchable. It felt possible. And as she and her mother walked toward the exit together, the question was no longer who she was, but how far her music would go next.